Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans le nouveau numéro d'Intersection X. Toute l'équipe du Printemps numérique travaille déjà d'arrache-pied pour notre prochain événement MTL Connect qui aura lieu dans moins de 2 mois, du 12 au 17 octobre, en mode hybride. Mais comme on est déjà impatient d'y être, on s'est dit qu'on allait aborder quelques thématiques dans nos entrevues Intersection. Aujourd'hui, nous allons aborder le sujet Beyond Good, comment la technologie nous mène vers une révolution des affaires à volonté d'impact. Ce numéro fera notamment écho à la thématique développement durable qui sera abordée lors de l'événement MTL Connect. Le numérique permet aujourd'hui de mieux concevoir les politiques écologiques, de mesurer la pollution et le changement climatique. Pourtant, bien qu'elle soit invisible à l'œil nu, la pollution numérique est bien réelle. Comment les innovations technologiques peuvent-elles nous aider à créer une prospérité écologiquement et socialement responsable? To discuss with us today about Beyond Good, how technology is leading a purpose-driven business revolution, I have the pleasure to welcome the authors of the book Theodora Lau and Leimer. Hi guys, welcome to Intersections X. How are you today?
Hi, thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Just before beginning, everyone who is watching us today, don't hesitate to ask your questions directly in the live chat and we'll try to answer it. So thank you for being here with us today, Theo and Bradley. Before beginning the discussion around your latest book, Beyond Good, could you please introduce yourself to our audience? Who are you? What's your background? What is Unconventional Ventures, etc., etc.? I think you have a podcast too. So maybe, Theo, you can begin and Bradley then.
Yes, thank you so much for having us, and we're super excited to be here. Now, it would have been better if we can actually do this in person, but voila, here we are. So my name is Theo, and I am the founder of Unconventional Ventures. I am from right outside the Metro DC area, and delighted to speak to you all today and about our new book, Beyond Good. A little bit of background about myself. Before that, my background actually is from telecom and IT. I spent about 15 years building systems and tearing systems down and trying to look at the intersection of customer experience and technology and how do we build for the future. Make a long story short, I spent then a few years in nonprofits and trying to explore how we can leverage technology for good for the well-being of older adults as we go older. And then the rest was history. I met Bradley and we founded the company Unconventional Ventures, where we've been working with corporates around the world. We provide consulting services looking at improving overall systemic financial wellness for everyone and trying to make banking better. We focus on a few verticals that we believe are very important and have been quite ignored for a while. One of the themes is longevity. So how do we help people live healthier and attain a more secure financial future? We also focus a lot of work on gig economy workers. Well, one would say the future of work and how we change the way we earn a living. But there are a lot of things that we have not thought through, that we need to provide better support structures for the gig workers worldwide. And the last but not least, one of my favorite themes is around inclusion, diversity. And we look at diversity not just in terms of gender or ethnicity, but we also look at diversity in terms of your education background, your age and sexual orientation and everything that make up the beautiful, diverse ecosystem that we are in right now. One of the things that we strongly believe in is everyone should have a chance to try and succeed, regardless of where you're from. And that's what we hope that we can do through our work.
Thank you very much, Bradley.
Yeah, so my name is Bradley Leimer. I am the other half of Unconventional Ventures. And in my background's really in banking itself, though I don't like to call myself a banker. The thing about my career is that I've spent 25 years sort of working within the system to make the system better. So I like to say that we will work with nearly anyone who wants to make banking itself better, the business model more inclusive, and the business model, more focused on serving the diverse needs and the fabric of our community. So I have spent time within community banks, community credit unions, working with large corporates and large banks. My most recent role was at Banco Santander, leading innovation and a lot of their venture activities within the United States. And so that's me in a nutshell, but we're excited to be here. And thank you so much, Montreal Connect, for hosting us.
It's a pleasure. You have both of you a very rich background and very atypical. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. So we'll dig more and strongly in the subject of today. I will quote Scott Astrada from Georgetown University Center and Digital Civil Associate of Fellow, Stanford University. How can technology build equitable and sustainable economic prosperity? Beyond Good is the best place to start for an answer because it forces us to rethink how innovation can be part of the solution. So can you tell us more about your book, Beyond Good, and where does the idea of writing it come from?
Yes, it's actually an interesting story. So Bradley and myself, we've been traveling around the world, talking to different entrepreneurs and looking at how different businesses have been doing things. We were so inspired by everyone's story, and we portray a lot of them in our podcast called One Vision. You can look it up on Apple Podcasts and also on Spotify. But we wanted a medium to tell their story, to inspire people that an industry, even an incumbent industry like banking, is change and has been changing, and that there are amazing people that are leading that change. We want to tell the stories from entrepreneurs from around the world that we can make a difference if we're intentional. And at the same time, a publisher from the UK approached us and wanted us to write a book about how we can use technology for good. And so we put everything together. When we first started, the world was very different. It was 2018. It was pre-COVID. And next thing you know, the world kind of turned upside down on us. And we finished the book of the story during summer. And we actually added a chapter to portray how things have changed during COVID and how people's lives have been impacted. It's a story of hope also. We want to take context of what's been changing, but also to provide a sense of hope when things just seem like, we're not going anywhere.
Do you think your book would be different if you write it in 3 years after COVID, after we hope, the rebirth of the world? Do you think it would be different about everything you think?
I would just say that if it were in 3 years, I would hope that things would be a little bit better because, if anything, the pandemic has exacerbated the issues that we address in the book. So the divide in income equality, the divide between gender in terms of opportunity, in terms of a equal access point to founding companies and starting businesses and building savings, there are so more inequities that have been just magnified because of this pandemic, both within the industry and within, sort of the capitalistic structure itself. And so when we wrote Beyond Good, the title itself is based on sort of a reaction to a book that came out more than 20 years ago called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And within that book, the premise was these are the great companies that have embraced growth and embraced the ability to build profit around a centralized component that their leaders can drive toward in order to best facilitate return to shareholders. Well, we sort of rejected that premise because it said that profit is your goal, that Adam Smith's idea that, the community that you live in, society, will be taken care of as long as everybody at the top is making money, and it'll trickle down, this idea. That's not happening. And the pandemic has only made that worse. And so you can have profit while you have purpose and while you serve your communities. And that's something that the pandemic has simply ripped apart and made us understand that the safety of a social net, the safety of companies that are doing the right thing, those things are more important than ever. And the pandemic has simply showed us that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'll echo that. When we first started writing the book, right, even though it was 2018, there were a lot of things that were already set in motion. And like what Bradley say, what has transpired in the last year and a half has just made it worse, right? When we talk about income inequality, you started by quoting Professor Estrada, right, on when he was talking about technology being equitable. He also said something that struck with us. He said, economic inequality is a human-made problem that can be solved. And that has always been true. The United States is one of the most, is one of the developed nations within the entire world that has the highest inequality, right? If you look at the income gap between the richest and the rest of it, it simply is not sustainable. And so as a society, we had to do better to look at how do we end up where we are right now? Is there a way that we can lift up some of the ones that need help, that are actually needing more help than they used to before? And there are ways to do that. And the book is a collection of examples on how people have tried to change this model and make it better for everybody.
But I'm an optimistic one in life, but today I want maybe to be on the other side. But we are a society for sure, but there is strong industries like banking and finances. So how these industries are reacting about your purpose, about your thinking of being good with technology, especially on financial activities and banking activities?
It's an interesting question. I think if we look at banking, right, there are actually a few really good examples that we quoted in the book that we love how they do. If you think about money, right, it's not just about, being able to buy things and sell things. It's also being able to move money, to store money, to have credit, to build up your company or your dreams, right, to go after your dreams, or to invest in the future for your family, for your friends. We look at the trends that's been going on in the world. One of the things I was always very interested in is how human longevity and how we are living longer and how that changes the way that we think about money and our relationship with money. We've lived an extra 30 years since the beginning of 1900s, right? So if you start thinking about, what do I do with that extra 30 years of healthy living? Do I work extra 30 years? I hope not. But how do I start thinking about how I work and how I earn money and what I do with the money, and how do I even plan for the future, and not just my own future? Because if everyone is living longer, that means that when I'll have children, when I have family, or how long my parents will be living will also change. So how does that changing family dynamics, how does having multiple generation of people start working together, working alongside each other, and having more people to support, how does that impact banking, which is something that hasn't changed for a long time? And so I think when we start talking about beyond good, when we start thinking about the needs of people, it's multifaceted, right? We need to start thinking about access to banking, not just, those people that the 1.7 billion people, to be exact, around the world who are unbanked, but also all the ones that are underbanked. How do we provide better services for these people? And it's a challenge for all of us.
So it's good because it is my next question. We can read in your book that to fulfill more than just basic needs, to help more people within our communities truly thrive, we will require a more responsive financial services ecosystem. Can you explain it to our audience? What are the key numbers and the reality of the situation, for example, and what kind of impact could it be with a more accessible financial services ecosystem for everyone? Broadly, you're on mute, I think. 2021 mood. No, not working. Maybe Theo, you can answer for beginning.
Is it working, Brad? Nope.
It's working for you, Theo. You can speak.
Oh, okay. Oh my God. Okay. So yeah, I think the stats are really interesting if we start looking at numbers, right? purely in the United States. For example, the unbanked is about 5% of households. So we're talking about 12 million adults who don't have access to formal financial services. But then if you start peeling down the layer, when we start looking at not just the unbanked, but also underbanked, now you're adding 24 million adults who are relying on French financial services, like, going to check cashing facilities, or, using alternate finances. But one of the misconceptions that oftentimes we don't think about is people think, well, providing services to the unbanked and underbanked or doing good as charity. And what we're trying to show in the book and also the work that we do is far from being charity. Because if you think about how this big population of people are getting services, they have to pay extra in order to cash a check, which we still use a lot of that in the US. They have to pay additional service fees just to maintain an account, et cetera, et cetera. So these people are paying more than a lot of us just to get access to financial services. So there is a market to be had, and there's an opportunity to be had for us to do good while not forgiving the profit, if that's one way to say it.
And can you hear me now? Am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I don't know what the heck happened there. All right. So what I would say is that having access is not enough. It's kind of like we need employment to get money to be able to live. But the ability to sort of buy and sell goods, to leverage your savings, to build your savings, the ability to move money, the ability to store that in terms of savings and investments, access to credit, all that stuff, that's just access. These are all modern day sort of financial activities that many of us have come to expect. It's part of daily life. But there's still 1.7 billion people on the planet that are unbanked. And the challenge is not limited to developing countries. So when we look at that number and we think about, how much financial services is changing, we have within this industry banked more than 1.2 billion people over the last decade alone because of the changes to the business model. So when you think about, access and inclusion and what we talk about in the book, this idea of a more responsive financial services system is addressing not just those people that don't have access into the sort of formal financial system, but it's also those that are suboptimal in terms of how they access service, how much those services cost, and where their capability of growing a more comfortable life because of that either lack of access or cost of access. And that is changing so dramatically because of what's happening within the financial services ecosystem.
We have some questions during the live session. What examples are there of companies showing that pursuing a greater good can be profitable? Do you have some examples to share with us?
Yes, I think we both have our favorites. I'll go with my first one. I think Brad knows which one I'm talking about. One of my favorite examples is it's a bank in Minnesota, in the United States. It's called Sunrise Banks, and what we love about them is it's a bank, and we portray them in our book as well. It's a bank that serves the immigrant community. It's a bank that serves a lot of the people that we don't typically think about when we think about mainstream banking. And it's also a bank that is a certified B Corp. So think about, a bank that does, an entity that does good, and it also happens to be in financial services. And not only are the products and services that they offer is to a demographics that are not being really cared for, it's also the way they structure the company, right? When we start thinking about diversity inclusion that we first, in the very beginning of the session, we also need to make sure that the people that are within the bank itself are also from a diverse background, right? We also need to make sure that not only the people are of mixed backgrounds, but they're also from mixed social demographic backgrounds. And that's what we love about them, is they not only focus on serving a very diverse audience, they also use their bank as a way to uplift the people, right, that need work, uplift and include the people that are not always being integrated in the mainstream banking industry.
Yeah, and I would say, that there's plenty of examples within the financial services ecosystem, within credit unions, within other types of banking institutions. But I say that, one of the ones that we call out quite a lot in the book is Ant Group and Ant Financial and Alipay and all the other services that they have. Their focus is on building out not just access to banking services, but connectivity to savings and investments and access to credit and building small businesses that really change people's lives. So they're one of the big, players in China, along with Tencent, that have improved the number of people that are in the financial services system, and they have improved people's financial lives. And so they also, though, focus on things like this initiative called Ant Forest, which allows them to have their customers have an offset to their carbon footprint by planting trees. And, they're one of the most successful financial entities that we've seen over the last several decades. And so you can have profit, you can have purpose, and those things can connect. And we call out so many more examples, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, within the financial services ecosystem. But the lesson of the book is that it's not just banking. If banking can be changed, if financial services, which is the most extractive industry, maybe next to oil and fossil fuels, in terms of business models, if we could change that, then any industry can change. Any industry can go beyond good.
Yep.
So, it's exciting times.
It is, and we draw a lot of inspiration from Asia, Brad, as you mentioned. So there are different companies, big tech companies, if you will, called, for example, Grab or Gojek. Those are two big companies in Southeast Asia, where they both started as logistics company. They try to sell transportation in the region. And they ended up noticing that a lot of their drivers did not have access to financial services. They don't have a way to deposit their money. They don't have a way to invest for the future. They don't have a way to get microloans. And so they started extending their services to these people, right? And that's the fascinating thing when you start looking at technology and looking at how we can use technology to change an industry. One of the quotes that was often used for a long time ago is, you don't need to be a bank to provide banking services. And these companies provide those examples on how you can do that, uplift the small business owners, uplift the solo entrepreneurs, uplift the immigrants and the women, and all of these foundational sectors of our community, and use that as a way to provide a different future for them.
Yeah, and in your book, you're telling us this book is about a more inclusive tomorrow, where we imagine a greater sense of the common good, a deeper sense of corporate responsibility, etc. I imagine that technology can help the world to be better. Do you agree with that? And how is it possible? How the technology could help us to go beyond good and beyond better world and communities?
Yeah, I would say that we challenge the readers, to reimagine how technology and how business model evolution really changes. We take notice of the impact on the communities within the businesses that are there. And as businesses grow larger, the problem and the question came across is, what are the biggest challenges? Well, whether it's technology in terms of how it's changing the way that services are delivered, I think the lead challenges are going to be around the time horizon and the profit connection between corporations and how they see the marketplace and how they see their place in society. With a longer time horizon and with a broader, more diverse leadership, you start to get into this point where you have systems leadership in place, which is looking at the entire picture along a longer purview of how things are changing and how your business model, your impact of your business is changing things. So can technology make things go beyond good? If the efficiency that technology delivers actually makes people's lives better, and the KPIs, the metrics that companies, include as part of their quarterly earnings statements actually talk about the value and the benefit to society and their communities they serve, then we're seeing things change. So that's kind of the way that I would look at it.
Okay. And is it only startups who can change the world, can improve this kind of reflection and thinking, or all the size of companies, businesses, industries, anything, anyone could improve their thinking about this interconnectivity, this access of the profit and of the data for themselves.
I would say that company of any size should be able to change. For example, the company that Brad was referencing earlier, Ant Group, is one of the largest big tech companies in China, right? So it's not just limited to startup per se. I think it comes down to intention. Are you intentional about doing good? And who are those who are in the power to make decisions, to make a change? And I think that's one of the challenges. Not so much so can technology do good, but more so is what are you trying to do and what drives you? So, for example, there's been a lot of focus on DEI, right? Driving diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the last year and a half, especially after the social movement that we've seen in the United States, where people are asking for and holding companies accountable for having a more diverse workforce. Now, there is a way to do it and make great announcements and change your logo and do a PR campaign, or there are those that are actively trying to promote people from within their company to give people voices and to bring different kind of talent to the table. So there are different ways of looking at it. I think in the end of the day, it comes down to leadership and it comes down to intention.
And I would add that, when you talk about an industry like banking, how can we take the changes that are within financial services and make banking better? And how could those lessons really go broader than just banking? Well, aligning profit with purpose and the long-term goals of the customers is one thing. Serving the needs of women, LGBTQ, people of color, people that are older, and identifying those gaps and that lack of attention in the past, or that systematic, racism that has occurred within this industry and others. Because the equality of a society is a reflection across all of the businesses and business models that are created. So when financial services has changed, it's because they've partnered and learned from startups. They've learned about how customer value and customer needs have changed. And they've started to act a little bit more attentive to the way that society has changed. So providing access to build better financial health, embedding value within payments and day-to-day banking activities. When we see more open banking, more embedded banking, drive value out of personal data, those are lessons for other businesses. You talk about, technology and its importance. Well, we can't lose this idea of empathy and understanding what basic human needs are. And we spend several chapters talking about food, water, and shelter. And we talk about the connectivity of technology and the role of businesses in order to ensure that more people have their basic needs met. So I think things are getting better, more transparent. There was a couple of questions that came in about cryptocurrency and blockchain and other technologies. It's just like any other technology. Nothing, Bitcoin is not going to change financial inclusion and all of a sudden have everybody as part of this system, because a decentralized model is not going to be as purposeful as one that's going to be delivered within our communities today. So there's an awful lot of change happening. There's an awful lot of examples that we use in the book, but I think it's just something that we have to look at how things have changed and take part, no matter what our role is within a business that we're in.
Yeah, and I'll echo that and add to it that I think we're in a very interesting time precisely because of everything that has transpired. If there's any learning that we could have taken from COVID-19, is that we are more reliant on technology than ever before. The fact that the three of us are here chatting with each other is through the tech and the devices that we have. But that also brings to forth, what about the ones that don't have access to digital, right? It's not just about being able to stream content. It's also being able to take part in the economy. And it's not just developing countries, it's also developed societies where there are still millions of people who are not in the digital ecosystem. And if there's anything that we can do as we look forward to the future, as we think about what role do we play, regardless of what industry you're in, we need to take a step back and look at how have our lives changed in the last year and a half, and what about the future of those who had not been able to be part of this revolution, if you will, while we are sitting comfortably at home and waiting for food delivery? What about those who are delivering food to us while we are in the juncture of arguing whether or not the future of work is hybrid or remote or in person? What about those who don't have a choice? And I hope that, if anything we have learned is we become more thoughtful and empathetic, to use Brad's words, human empathy, towards those that don't have access to the opportunities that we have had, and how we can change our industries and companies to a better future.
We have another question. Technology can do a great many positive things, but a business model beholden to shareholders is tough structure to change. So have you found examples of political will, maybe?
Well, I think, we talked about Sunrise Banks and B corporations, and these are still for-profit corporations that give back to their, societies and their communities that they serve. And, we look at in the book Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream and Patagonia and other companies that have said, look, we're going to have purpose built into our business model, regardless of, what we are productizing, what type of service and business model we're in. There is, from small to big, plenty of examples of companies that have said, look, we're not going to be beholden to this quarterly cycle of madness, that our financial return to our shareholders are going to mean less than our value proposition that returns to the market and society and our communities in terms of a more stakeholder model. But we have to remember who's a stakeholder. Who decides how inclusive that business to by product from the companies that we choose to work in. And so all of us as consumers, as businesses, as leaders are part of that stack of decision making that makes a society and our community better.
Yeah, I would like to think that our world is changing a little bit. We talk a lot about the younger generation demanding more. And, I think we will slowly start to see change. Change is hard. We need to keep at it.
To summarize maybe the discussion of today, if there is one socially conscious strategy for business leaders that you would like to put forward today, what would it be for both of you?
What did you, sorry, would you mind repeating
Yes.
that?
If there is one socially conscious strategy for business leaders that you would like to put forward today, what would it be?
Well, I would love for more companies to consider thinking who they will include in their workforce, right? We talk a lot about people living longer, people working longer, and we talk more about multiple generations of people working alongside each other. I think one of the important things we don't think about is how do we create a way for multiple generations of people to work together. We focus a lot about younger generation, about the digital natives of what have you, but the older generation also have lived experiences, right, that you don't particularly acquire from a book. And there is a lot of advantage to be had if we can have a more integrated society where we can learn from each other. And not to mention, I think, one of the biggest focus I had is women, right? What has happened to women, especially since COVID? We have lost 30-something years of progress, right? We have had a lot of women who stopped working because they had to take care of their children or because they have to take care of their older parents. And what are companies doing to bring these women back into the workforce? It is not an easy job before COVID, and it's much harder post-COVID. How do we reskill and upskill talent? I think that is one big strategy we need to start thinking about.
Bradley, what would that be for you?
Yeah, I mean, so we give a lot of examples in the book about companies that are using technology to sort of broaden inclusion. But the other thing that I would say is, in terms of a lesson, a long-term lesson, is that while we have probably 120 or 130 sort of mini case studies in the book and interviews across these type of companies, one thing that has occurred just in the last 6 to 12 months is that within banking, for example, serving the underserved communities are becoming less of a segment, less of a niche. And we see examples of this with companies like Blue Money, which is serving immigrants in the UK, Daylight, which is serving LGBTQ here in the US, Cheese, which are serving Asian Americans and immigrants also, First Boulevard and Greenwood serving African Americans, Latinx, Quill, Lily Stuvo, which are focused on gig workers and freelancers, Aspiration, which we just love, which is focused on climate-driven impact, Stretch Finance, which is focused on prison inmates as they come out of prison to make sure that they have, something under their feet as they come back into society. Tab Bank, which is focused on truckers in the transportation industry. Purple, which is focusing on people with disabilities. These are all companies that are focused on part of their community that banks have neglected for decades and decades and decades. And so my lesson to anybody on this call is that regardless of where you are, regardless of what industry you're in, you can make a difference. You could either found a company, you could change things within your business, your industry, and every single day you have a choice to where you do your own personal business and to where you seek and have employment from. So you can be part of this change.
It's very strong. It's very strong. Thank you very much for being with us today about technology leading to a purpose-driven business revolution, we hope. Merci à tous d'avoir été parmi nous aujourd'hui. Intersection X n'est pas fini. Nous reviendrons le 9 septembre avec un sujet qui fera cette fois écho aux thématiques travail de demain et ville du futur avec Mélanie Boivin, directrice design intérieur chez Haddock Architect. Aussi, n'oubliez pas, si vous n'avez pas encore pris votre billet pour MTL Connect, le tarif Lefto est encore accessible jusqu'au 31 août. Donc, dépêchez-vous. Sinon, profitez du soleil ou de la pluie pour aujourd'hui et des vacances pour ceux qui y sont encore. Et sinon, je vous dis à dans 2 semaines. Merci beaucoup et bye bye. Thank you very much, Theo and Brad. Bye.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.